Welcome back to a new video. Today we will talk about a very controversial historical topic, the three most corrupt and perverse popes in history. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Leave a like to support me on this historic journey. Now let's start. John 12, the most controversial pope in history. From 33 AD, when St. Peter became the first bishop of Rome, up to Pope Francis, there have been 266 pontiffs who have succeeded one another at the head of the Catholic Church. Among them, there have been saintly popes and warrior popes, humble and dissolute. But if we were to crown the absolute worst, John XII would earn the title hands down. We are just before the year 1000. John XII, registered as Ottaviano dei Conti di Tusculum, is elected pope at only 18 years old, more by the will of his father, the powerful Alberico II, than by spiritual merit. His is a story of lust, wars, political intrigues, and a stormy relationship with the empire. Alberico, Lord of Rome, a powerful man and son of Marozia, a dominant figure in 10th century Rome, wanted to ensure the succession of power to his family. Shortly before dying, in 954, he forced the nobles and clergy to promise that, upon the death of the Pope in office, Agapetus II, they would elect his son. And so it was. In 955, Ottaviano became Pope John XII, the second in history to change his name. But there was a problem. He was not a cleric, he had no theological training, and his conduct was anything but ecclesiastical. The Liber Pontificalis describes him thus: he lived his whole life between adultery and vanity. John XII did not limit himself to the pleasures of the flesh. He sought to strengthen the temporal power of the papacy, attempting to recover the patrimony of St. Peter, lands that the Carolingians had donated to the church, but which in the meantime had ended up under the control of the Italian kings. Thus, at only 19 years old, he launches military campaigns against Benevento, Capua, Milan, and the Kingdom of Italy. Results: disastrous. After several failures on the field, he decides to seek a powerful ally, Emperor Otto I of Germany. In 1962, Otto entered Rome. He swore loyalty to the Church, was crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and signed the Privilegium Ottonianum, which guaranteed autonomy to the Pope, but also established that any future papal election must have the approval of the Emperor, a severe blow to the independence of the Roman Church. The relationship between Otto and John, initially collaborative, quickly deteriorates. The Pope begins to plot with the enemies of the Emperor, in particular Berengar II and his son Adalbert, and is even accused of seeking alliances with the Muslims and fomenting revolts in Hungary. Betrayal and fall. When Otto discovered the Pope's plots, in 1963, he returned to Rome, accused him of high treason, deposed him, and had one of his most faithful followers elected, Leo VIII, even though he was still a layman. John VIII flees, but does not surrender. From Corsica, he threatens excommunications, and as soon as Otto leaves the city, he returns to Rome with the support of the people, who do not tolerate the interference of the emperor. Leo VIII flees, and John regains power, taking cruel revenge on his opponents. The monster pope. It is during this period that the black legend about John XII was born, fueled by imperial chroniclers such as Liutprand of Cremona, a pro-Ottoman bishop. They described him as a moral monster, He celebrated Mass without receiving communion. He ordained bishops for a fee, even a 10-year-old child. He sexually abused women, widows, and even a niece. He transformed the Lateran into a brothel. He toasted the devil and invoked Jupiter and Venus during dice games. He castrated and killed a cardinal, blinded his spiritual father. He wore a helmet and breastplate and hunted publicly, all elements that today seem scandalous to us. But in the context of the time, in an era in which even priests had wives and concubines, were not so rare. What John XII did was not different from what many other noble men of his time did, such as Otto himself. But put down in black and white, it became useful to legitimize his deposition. The return and the end. In 964, John XIII returned triumphantly to Rome after a new popular revolt. He resumed the papal throne, but his revenge was ferocious. He mutilated, tortured, and punished anyone who betrayed him. His restoration did not last long. A few months later, he died under mysterious circumstances. According to some chronicles, he was killed by a jealous husband who had surprised him in bed with his wife. Other sources speak of a stroke during a romantic encounter. He was just 27 years old. The second pope is Pope Rodrigo Borgia. Rodrigo Borgia, better known as Pope Alexander VI, is often considered one of the most corrupt and scandalous popes of all time. But was he really as perverse as he is portrayed? Or was his bad reputation the result of propaganda by his enemies? Rodrigo was born on the 1st of January 1431 in Jativa, in the ancient kingdom of Valencia, to a family of Aragonese origins. From a young age, he demonstrated boundless ambition and an unstoppable thirst for power. His big break came in 1455, when his uncle, Alfonso de Borja, was elected pope under the name of Calixtus III. Thanks to his uncle's protection, Rodrigo received titles, riches, and was sent to study canon law in Bologna. But he was not satisfied. He wanted more. He wanted everything. From the beginning, he declared that his goal was the papal throne, and he would do anything to achieve it. Over the years, Rodrigo became a key figure in the Vatican, skillfully exploiting nepotism, strategic alliances, and his undisputed charisma. In 1492, upon the death of Pope Innocent VIII, the conclave opened. Rodrigo realized that the only way to win was to buy votes. He is said to have offered money, titles, and lands in exchange for the support of the cardinals. His rival, Giuliano della Rovere, the future Pope Julius II, openly accused him of having bought the papacy, but he was unable to stop him. Rodrigo was elected pope with the name of Alexander VI, beginning one of the most controversial pontificates in history. Unlike other popes, he did not bother to hide his dissolute life. He had at least 7 recognized children, many born from extramarital affairs. His most famous lover was Vanozza Catanei, mother of Cesare, Lucrezia, Giovanni, and Goffredo Borgia. But his relationships did not stop there. Among the most famous was the one with Giulia Farnese, with whom he had another daughter, Laura. Among the most infamous episodes of his pontificate is the infamous Chestnut Banquet, which supposedly took place on October 31st, 1500. According to the account of Johann Burchard, the Vatican's master of ceremonies, the Pope and his son Cesare organized an orgy with 50 naked courtesans who picked chestnuts from the ground with their mouths. However, many historians doubt the veracity of the event, considering it part of anti-Borgia propaganda. The parties and corruption were only part of the scandal. The Borgias also used violence and murder to consolidate their power. Their eldest son Giovanni was found murdered in 1497. Suspicion fell on Cesare, driven by envy and ambition. Cesare himself was also said to have been involved in the murder of Lucrezia's second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, who was strangled on his orders. In 1493, Alexander VI issued the famous Alexandrian Bulls, which gave Spain control of the lands of the New World, on the condition that the natives converted to Christianity, a gesture that profoundly influenced the destiny of Latin America and strengthened papal power. Even Niccolò Machiavelli, in his famous treatise, The Prince, described Alexander VI as a master of deception and political manipulation. At the height of his power, Alexander sought to found a true papal dynasty. He made Cesare Borgia his armed wing, an ambitious, ruthless, and charismatic general who accumulated over 26 noble titles. But fate turned its back on the Borgias. On August 18, 1503, Pope Alexander VI died suddenly in circumstances that have never been clarified. The hypotheses, accidental poisoning, perhaps caused by a failed plan to kill some cardinals, malaria, which was very widespread at the time, murder, orchestrated by his many enemies. His corpse decomposed so rapidly that it became unrecognizable, fueling rumors of divine retribution. With his death, the Borgia Empire collapsed. Cesare lost his dominions. Lucrezia retired to a more private life, and the Borgia family became the very symbol of ecclesiastical corruption. But were they really that evil? Or was their black legend amplified by those who hated them for political reasons, particularly their aversion to a foreign pope? What is certain is that Alexander VI left an indelible mark on the history of the papacy, a mark made of nepotism, deceit, lust, and blood. In the depths of the darkness of the 11th century, an era that has already gone down in history as the Iron Age of the papacy, a figure emerged who was destined to embody the most extreme excesses of corruption and moral decadence: Benedict IX. This young man, belonging to the powerful family of the Counts of Tusculum, was elected pope on 3 occasions, between 1132 and 1148, staining the papal throne with behavior so scandalous that it culminated in an unprecedented act: the sale of the papacy as if it were just any other asset. Although contemporary chronicles, often influenced by political and religious adversaries, are sometimes exaggerated, they paint a portrait of a dissolute, capricious, and violent man who transformed the Lateran into a theater of orgies and atrocities. St. Peter Damian himself called him the abomination of desolation in the temple of God, while the future Pope Victor II described him as a demon from hell disguised as a priest. The origins: who then was Benedict IX? How was it possible for a teenager to ascend to the throne of Peter? And despite his infamies, his figure remains surprisingly marginal in the collective memory today. The papacy that Benedict IX inherited was already immersed in one of its darkest phases, the period defined by historians as saeculum obscurum, or pornocracy. Spiritual power had fallen into the hands of aristocratic Roman families who used it to consolidate their dominion. Among these, the family of the Counts of Tusculum had assumed almost total control over papal elections. Descendants of the ancient Alberici lineage, The Tusculani dominated a large territory to the southeast of Rome, with Frascati as its nerve center. Strengthened by strategic alliances and prestigious relatives, they had already managed to place 3 members of the family on the papal throne before Benedict XIII. The latter, born Theophylact, was born around the year 120 to Alberic III, and Maria, a noblewoman about whom little is known. He grew up among the privileges of the Roman aristocracy, receiving a more worldly than spiritual education, a gap that would weigh heavily during his pontificate. Upon the death of John XIX in 132, Alberic III did not hesitate to impose his own son as successor. Theophylact was probably between 12 and 16 years old, a surprisingly young age for a pontiff. According to contemporary chroniclers, such as Rudolf the Glaber, his election was secured by large sums of money in an emblematic episode of simony. On October 21st, 1032, Theophylact was crowned with the name of Benedict IX, becoming one of the youngest popes in history. Emperor Conrad II immediately recognized his election, strengthening the alliance between the German imperial house and the Tusculan family. The new pope immediately proved faithful to the emperor, supporting him in the intricate political events of Italy. However, the consecration of the young Theophylact was only the beginning of one of the most controversial pontificates in history. In the first months, Benedict IX maintained a semblance of administrative regularity, guided by the advisors of his family. But soon, his true nature emerged. Desiderius of Monte Cassino, the future Pope Victor III, described him as dedicated to a dissolute and abominable life. He transformed the Lateran into a place of celebration, lust, and scandal, with banquets that, according to contemporary sources, degenerated into orgies. Pietro Damiani, a central figure in the Reform movement, denounced the papal palace in his letters as a brothel of sodomites, dominated by carnal passions. The Liber Gomorianus, while not directly naming Benedict, condemned those who, while holding ecclesiastical offices, indulged in the most shameful vices. The accusations were not limited to the moral sphere. Benedict IX participated in wild hunts, ignored his religious functions, and according to the chronicler Bernoldo di Costanza, even practiced pagan rites and magic. Furthermore, he did not hesitate to physically eliminate his opponents. In 1135, he had dozens of Roman nobles executed in a massacre inside the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the Second Pontificate, and the sale of the papacy. In 1444, a revolt led by the Crescenzi forced him to flee. But in March 1455, Benedict IX returned to Rome at the head of a mercenary army, retaking possession of the Lateran. However, aware of the fragility of his power, and perhaps still obsessed with a cousin he wanted to marry, he committed the most sensational act of his career. He sold the papacy. On the 1st of May, 1045, for the sum of 1,500 pounds of silver, he formally ceded the tiara to Giovanni Graziano, archpriest of San Giovanni a Porta Latina, who took the name of Gregory VI. The latter, a man of great morality, accepted the purchase not out of ambition, but in an attempt to save the Church from an unworthy pontiff. The chaos of the 3 popes and the end. However, Benedict IX did not really give up power. In November of the same year, taking advantage of the absence of Gregory VI, he returned to Rome for the 3rd time. The city thus found itself with 3 popes at the same time: Benedict IX, Gregory VI and Sylvester III, creating an unprecedented crisis. Emperor Henry III intervened in 146, convening the Synod of Sutri. Sylvester III was declared anti-pope and forced to retire. Gregory VI, although respected, admitted the simoniacal acquisition of the papacy and was exiled to Germany. Benedict IX did not appear at the synod, but was formally deposed and excommunicated for simony, murder, and other serious crimes. In his place, Henry III imposed the Bishop of Bamberg, Switzer, who became Clement II. On Christmas Day in the year 146, Clement crowned Henry emperor, establishing a new order between temporal and spiritual power. The last attempt. The story of Benedict Nation did not end here. Upon the sudden death of Clement II in October 147, perhaps by poisoning, Benedict attempted a final coup, returning to the Lateran for the third and last time. His power, however, did not last long. Isolated and without consensus, he was definitively expelled. He died a few years later, in obscure circumstances. The troubled history that saw the Catholic Church led simultaneously by three popes, Benedict IX, Sylvester III, and Gregory VI, represents one of the darkest and most dramatic moments in the entire history of the papacy. This episode, known as the Tricapitoline Crisis or the Triple Usurpation, was not only the fruit of personal ambitions and power games, but the clear symptom of a moral and institutional crisis that undermined the very foundations of the Church. Benedict IX, an emblematic figure of corruption and decadence, rose to the papal throne at a very young age, supported exclusively by the influence of his family, the Counts of Tusculum. His scandalous conduct, made up of abuses, violence, licentious parties, crimes, and even the sale of the papacy itself, has given posterity a disconcerting image of a pontiff more similar to a medieval tyrant than to a successor of Peter. Benedict was not only a man unworthy of the tiara, but also the symbol of a church on its knees, prey to aristocratic potentates and rampant simony. His incredible political longevity, with three distinct pontificates between 1132 and 1148, demonstrates how ecclesiastical structures were now subordinated to earthly and family interests, incapable of reacting effectively. Sylvester III, for his part, was an ephemeral pope, imposed by force by a rival faction, the Crescenzi, as a response to the Tusculan arbitrariness. Although he played a minor role in the historical narrative compared to the other two, his election represents an open wound, the manipulation of the sacred papal office into a mere instrument in the hands of the Roman aristocracies. His brief stay on the papal throne was not sufficient to leave a significant mark, but contributed to worsening the confusion and instability of those years, giving further confirmation of the profound laceration of ecclesiastical authority. Gregory VI, finally, is perhaps the most ambiguous and complex figure. A man of recognized culture and morality, and linked to the nascent reform movement, he accepted the papacy by purchasing it from Benedict IX, in a gesture that, although motivated by ideally noble intentions, remained a gravely simoniacal act. His rise represented a paradox, a morally upright pope who came to power with morally corrupt means. This contrast was unsustainable, and even if Gregory VI tried to start a timid reform, his position soon became indefensible, and he was forced to resign under the pressure of the synod convened by Henry III in Sutri. His removal, however, would have sown the seeds for a future moral redemption of the Church, He was the teacher of the future Gregory VII, one of the most important pontiffs of the ecclesiastical Reformation. These three popes, each in his own way, embody the different aspects of the ecclesiastical degradation of the 11th century. The lust for power, Benedict IX, the fragility of authority, Sylvester III, and the moral compromise in the hope of renewal, Gregory VI. Their intertwined story was so scandalous and dramatic that it pushed the imperial authority to intervene directly in the life of the Church, marking a decisive moment in the struggle between spiritual and temporal power. The epilogue of the crisis, with the simultaneous deposition of the three popes and the election of Clement II by Emperor Henry III, was not only an act of force, but a symbolic attempt at purification. It was the beginning of the slow journey towards that great season of ecclesiastical reforms that, in the space of a few decades, would radically transform the Catholic Church, leading to the end of pornocracy and the birth of a new conception of the papacy, finally freed, at least in part, from aristocratic power games and secular corruption. In conclusion, the crisis of the three popes is not only a dark chapter of the past, but an eternal warning. When faith bends to politics and the sacred merges with the profane, even the oldest and most powerful institutions risk collapse. But it is precisely in moments of greatest darkness that the possibility of a true rebirth can arise. And in that turbulent season, amid scandals, usurpations, and vendettas, the foundations of the future reform of the Church were laid, destined to change its face and history forever. Here we are. We have come to the end of this journey through the life and legacy of these three great popes. Now, I would really like to know what you think. Which of these figures shocked you the most? Or maybe there is some detail or anecdote that struck you in particular. Write it to me in the comments, because the comparison and sharing of ideas are what makes this community so special and alive. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a nice like to let me know, and share it with your friends or family who love history or are interested in these topics. Every support you give helps the channel a lot to grow and always bring new quality content. Also, I strongly encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Also, activate the notification bell. This way, you will be the first to discover all the news, and you can immediately participate in the discussions. And if you have any questions, curiosities, or ideas about other historical figures, events, or topics you would like to explore, write them in the comments. Your voice is very important to decide together which topics to address in the future. Thank you so much for following this video to the end. It's always a pleasure to share this content with you and grow together. See you soon in the next video.